The year is 2400 BC. A coppersmith named Khasekhemwy accidentally seals water inside a bronze vessel over his forge, and the resulting explosion tears through his workshop, killing him instantly. But one witness, a priest-engineer named Imhotep the Younger, sees something the others miss. He sees power. Imagine standing at the exact moment when human civilization splits into two timelines. In our world, this discovery was forgotten, lost to time and superstition. But what if it wasn't? What if ancient Egypt, already masters of mathematics, astronomy, and engineering, unlocked the secret of steam power 2,000 years before the Industrial Revolution? What if the pyramids weren't just tombs, but power plants? Tonight, we explore the most radical alternative history ever conceived. A world where Bronze Age genius meets industrial might, where pharaohs command not just armies of men, but legions of machines, where the Nile doesn't just provide water. It provides unlimited mechanical power. This is the story of what could have been, and perhaps what should have been. To understand why Egypt was uniquely positioned for this discovery, we must first understand what they had already achieved. By 2400 BC, Egypt possessed mathematical sophistication that wouldn't be matched in Europe for millennia. They calculated pi to remarkable accuracy. They understood leverage, pulleys, and complex mechanical advantage. They had already built the Great Pyramid, a feat requiring the precise movement of 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing up to 15 tons. They worked bronze to perfection, creating vessels that could withstand enormous pressure. They controlled the Nile's flooding with sophisticated irrigation systems, demonstrating mastery over water management. Most crucially, they had centralized authority. The pharaoh's word was absolute law, meaning innovations could be implemented across the entire kingdom instantly. No committees, no debates, just pure, focused execution. When Imhotep the Younger brought his observations to Pharaoh Pepi II, he didn't face skepticism. He faced immediate interest. Within weeks, the royal workshops were conducting experiments. Within months, they had created the first practical steam engine. And within a year, everything changed. The prototype was deceptively simple: a sealed bronze sphere mounted on a pivot with two L-shaped pipes extending from opposite sides. Water heated inside the sphere. Steam escaped through the pipes at angles, creating rotational force. The ancient Greeks would later create something similar, called Hero's engine, as a toy. But in this timeline, the Egyptians saw it as something else entirely. They saw scalable power. The first practical application came in the stone quarries of Aswan. For centuries, workers had manually cut and transported massive granite blocks using copper tools, wooden rollers, and pure human muscle. Now, steam-powered cutting saws slice through stone in hours instead of weeks. Steam-powered cranes lifted blocks that would have required hundreds of men. Production increased tenfold almost overnight. But it was the second application that truly transformed Egypt: steam-powered water pumps. Imagine being a farmer whose fields have always depended on the Nile's annual flood, praying each year for the right water level. Now imagine turning a valve and watching water flow uphill, irrigating fields that were previously desert. Within 5 years, Egypt's agricultural output doubled. Within 10 years, it tripled. The population exploded. And with it, ambition. By 2300 BC, Egypt had become something unprecedented in human history. A Bronze Age industrial superpower. Steam-powered Nile barges, capable of moving upstream against the current, revolutionized trade and military logistics. Where once it took weeks to transport an army from Memphis to Thebes, it now took days. Egyptian expansion accelerated dramatically. To the south, Nubian kingdoms fell not to superior tactics, but to superior technology. Egyptian steam-powered siege engines battered walls that had stood for centuries. To the north, the Canaanite city-states found themselves facing an enemy that could arrive without warning, supplied by mechanical means they couldn't comprehend. But Egypt wasn't just conquering, it was transforming. Alexandria, not yet founded in our timeline, emerged in this world as the first true industrial city. Massive steam-powered textile mills produced linen on scales previously unimaginable. Bronze foundries, powered by steam-driven bellows, operated day and night, producing weapons, tools, and engine components. The population of Alexandria reached 500,000 people by 2200 BC, a demographic impossibility in our timeline. The wealth flowing into Egypt was staggering, and with wealth came something else: hubris. Steam power didn't just change Egypt's economy and military, it fundamentally altered Egyptian culture and religion. The traditional pantheon faced a crisis. If human ingenuity could control water, could power machines, could overcome natural limitations, what role did the gods play? A new theological framework emerged, promoted by the priest engineers who now formed Egypt's intellectual elite. They argued that the gods had always intended humans to discover these secrets. That steam was the breath of Ptah, the creator god. That mastering it was humanity's divine destiny. Massive temple complexes were redesigned as combination religious and industrial centers. The sound of prayer mixed with the hiss of steam and the clang of bronze hammers. A new class emerged, the mechanicos, combining religious authority with technical expertise. To become a priest now required not just theological knowledge, but engineering mastery. The line between sacred and mechanical blurred completely, but not everyone celebrated this transformation. Traditional priests, whose authority came from interpreting omens and performing rituals, found themselves increasingly irrelevant. Farmers displaced by mechanical irrigation systems drifted to cities, creating urban poverty previously unknown in Egypt. And in the workshops, accidents became commonplace: boiler explosions, steam burns, mechanical injuries. Progress had a price. The crisis came in 2150 BC during the reign of Pharaoh Mariner III. Egypt's steam infrastructure had grown exponentially for 250 years. Thousands of engines operated across the kingdom, from massive pyramid construction sites to small village water pumps. But there was a problem no one had anticipated: fuel. The engines ran on wood and charcoal. For 2.5 centuries, Egypt had been burning through its forests at an unsustainable rate. The cedar forests of Lebanon, once vast, had been reduced to scattered groves. The acacia forests of Nubia were gone entirely. Fuel shortages triggered cascading failures. Factories shut down. Irrigation systems stopped. The Nile barges couldn't operate. And then came the worst Nile flood in living memory. Without mechanical pumps to manage the water, entire cities flooded. Without steam-powered grain mills, the surplus crops rotted. Famine struck. The population, which had swelled to unprecedented levels based on mechanized agriculture, suddenly faced starvation. Riots erupted in Alexandria and Memphis. The mechanicos, once revered, were now blamed for the catastrophe. Some were murdered by angry mobs. Mariner III faced an impossible choice: abandon steam technology entirely and return to traditional methods, condemning millions to death, or find a new fuel source? He chose neither. Mariner III authorized something unprecedented in Egyptian history: a scientific expedition with unlimited resources and a single objective: find alternative fuel. The expedition, led by the mechanicos Khasekhemwy, traveled farther than any Egyptian force had ventured before. They moved west along the Mediterranean coast, through Libya, and eventually reached the mountains of what we call Morocco. And there, exposed in cliff faces near the coast, they found black stone that burned: coal. The discovery seemed miraculous, divine intervention to the Egyptians. Khasekhemwy's reports described it as eternal fire stone, fuel that burned hotter and longer than any wood. More importantly, the deposits appeared virtually limitless. Within 6 months, Egyptian miners were extracting coal. Within a year, specially designed steam-powered ships were transporting it back to Egypt. Within 2 years, the engines roared back to life. The crisis had been averted, but Egypt had fundamentally changed. The kingdom now controlled a vast maritime network stretching across the Mediterranean. The need to protect coal shipments led to the creation of the first true Egyptian navy, steam-powered warships that dominated the seas. And the coal itself, burning hotter than wood, enabled even more powerful engines. Egypt entered its second industrial revolution before completing its first. By 1900 BC, the Mediterranean world was unrecognizable. Egypt dominated completely, but it wasn't alone in possessing steam technology anymore. The secrets had leaked. Greek city-states, using captured Egyptian engineers and stolen blueprints, developed their own steam industries. But they arrived late to the game. Egyptian advantages in coal access, infrastructure, and experience proved insurmountable. The classical Greek civilization we know, built on philosophy and democracy, never emerged in this timeline. Instead, Greek states became industrial vassals, mining Anatolian metals for Egyptian markets. The Minoan civilization, in our timeline a maritime trading culture, became a manufacturing hub, producing mechanical components for Egyptian engines. Mesopotamia, once Egypt's equal, fell catastrophically behind. Their agricultural base couldn't compete with mechanized Egyptian farming. Their cities couldn't match Egyptian industrial output. By 1800 BC, the great cities of Ur and Babylon were Egyptian protectorates, their ziggurats converted into factories. But the greatest transformation occurred in what we call Europe. In our timeline, Europe remained tribal and primitive until Roman times. In this timeline, Egyptian coal requirements drove expansion northward. By 1700 BC, Egyptian colonies dotted the coasts of Italy, France, and Spain, extracting resources and spreading industrial technology. The Bronze Age never ended in this timeline. It evolved, accelerated, metastasized. Modern historians examining this timeline face a profound question. Was this progress? By 1500 BC, Egyptian steam technology had advanced to sophistication that wouldn't appear in our timeline until the 1800s AD. They had developed standardized parts, assembly line production, and even primitive mechanized computation using bronze gears. Their understanding of thermodynamics was remarkable. They'd invented pressure gauges, safety valves, and even experimented with steam-powered locomotion on rails. But at what cost? The Egypt of this timeline had lost much of what made ancient Egypt great. The pyramids, in our timeline symbols of architectural perfection, had become functional power stations covered in pipes and soot. The elaborate tomb paintings and literature focused less on the afterlife and more on engineering specifications. The society had stratified dramatically. The Mechanicos elite controlled immense wealth and power. The working classes operated dangerous machinery in conditions we'd call industrial slavery. Environmental devastation was extreme. The Mediterranean forests were gone. Coal smoke created air pollution that shortened lifespans in cities. Rivers ran black with industrial waste. Perhaps most tragically, the culture that gave us the Book of the Dead, the temples of Karnak, and the artistry of Tutankhamun's tomb never fully developed. Those spiritual and artistic achievements were casualties of mechanization. Progress, but at the cost of humanity's soul. Of course, this is all speculation, alternative history, plausible fiction. In our timeline, ancient Egypt never discovered steam power. That coppersmith's accident was forgotten. Imhotep the Younger never existed. The ancient world developed slowly, organically, through centuries of gradual innovation. And perhaps that was better. Because when we finally did develop steam power, in the 1700s and 1800s, we had also developed philosophy, ethics, and democratic systems that at least attempted to mitigate the worst excesses of industrialization. Ancient Egypt, for all its genius, was an absolute monarchy. Steam power in the hands of pharaohs would have created an authoritarian industrial dystopia unlike anything in human history. But here's the unsettling part. The ancient Egyptians came closer to this discovery than we realize. They had the metallurgy, they had the mathematical knowledge, they had the centralized power structure. They were perhaps only one observation, one curious mind, one fortunate accident away from changing world history forever. So tonight, as you consider this alternative timeline, ask yourself, what other discoveries are we one accident away from? What technologies lie dormant, waiting for the right mind at the right moment? And when they emerge, will we be ready for the consequences? The Steam Pharaohs never ruled our world, but somewhere in the infinite possibilities of quantum mechanics and parallel universes, perhaps they rule still.